Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman.
This week on Heroic Media, U.S. bishops back legislation that would prevent the federal government from bypassing state marriage laws.
Lawmakers in New York introduced right-to-die legislation inspired by the late Brittany Maynard.
Women and doctors come forward to question the safety of permanent birth control, Essure.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we discuss news headlines that deal with foundational moral issues, and we really try to look at issues that are the foundation of society and that really surround family, marriage, and life because they're so fundamental to the rest of the culture.
Absolutely, and a lot of times the stories that we'll cover will be around topics like abortion or euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly. So Patrick, what's our first story for today?
All right, in our first story, new Republican-led legislation set to affirm the state's right to define marriage gets backing by the head of the U.S. Bishops' Marriage Committee. So I guess I'd like to start with just a quote from Bishop Cordileone from San Francisco, okay? And he says, various agencies of the executive branch are effectively, if not intentionally, trying to circumvent state laws defining marriage as a union of one man and one woman. And so that's really what the core of this story is about, right? And so there's been a large battle now, it seems like, between the federal government and various states, where states have said, this is what marriage is, and then the federal government, by virtue of these different, just trying to dance around words pretty much, trying to get the federal government to overrule what states have set down. And so a new legislature has come up by Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Randy Weber. And so basically the bishop, Cordileone, is saying he supports this measure because it's affirming the state's right to define marriage. And that's essentially what's happened in recent history here in 2013 with the outcomes of with the strike down basically of the Defense of Marriage Act and DOMA. And basically what DOMA said was that it affirms the state's right. And that's pretty much the basis for this legislation.
Right. And I think it's important to remind viewers that in the big sort of 2013 Supreme Court case that was really a landmark case, when they struck down part of DOMA, what the court said was, for federal purposes, we're going to recognize what the states do. So they weren't saying there's a fundamental right to gay marriage.
Exactly.
What they were saying was if an individual state recognizes a certain union as a marriage, then the federal government will do the same. So the federal government is just going to do what each individual state does.
Right.
And so, but that premise that was being laid down by the court has not necessarily been respected.
Exactly.
What we've seen is that there have been a lot of pushes to take the states that have defined marriage as the union of one man and one woman and overturn those.
Yes.
So if we look at some of the numbers, there are currently 36 states that recognize same-sex marriage, and then 2 others have partial recognition. But of those, the majority, 25, they were imposed by a court.
Right.
And then there were another 8 by the state legislature. So there's only been 3 out of those 36 that have actually, where the people have actually voted and said we want to redefine marriage. And so what you see, and this all happened very quickly too, it's been a sort of a concentrated effort. Of the states that have redefined marriage, 28 of those cases happened in 2013 and 2014.
Wow.
So more than half of the U.S. had marriage redefined for them in a 2-year span. So it's a very intentional and concentrated effort that we're seeing here.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's against the will of the people, and I think that's the key too, right? Because states get to vote on this, and they voted, the majority voted to have these laws in effect. And so the name of this new act is the State Marriage Defense Act of 2015. Basically what it says is that it will recognize a couple's marriage in the state where they currently reside, not where they got their marriage license. So if you got married in a state that recognized same-sex marriage, and then you move to a state that does not recognize same-sex marriage, that this act would basically say you have to follow whatever state's whatever state you're living in, that's what the laws you would have to follow. So what people are doing and how things are getting circumvented is they get married in a different state, move into the state that they actually want to live in, and then still get like federal benefits.
Right, exactly.
And so this says, no, whatever the state is, that's the benefits and the laws, et cetera, is what you have to follow.
Right, and I think this raises a bigger question here about what is marriage? Is it something that, is it just a human institution that's created by the state and that we can redefine at will? Or is it, as the Catholic Church suggests, something that actually predates government, something that's a very foundational human institution that has to do with the procreation and future generations? And if that's the case, then it's something to be respected, not redefined. And Archbishop Corleone says marriage needs to be preserved and strengthened, not redefined. So it's just a question, is this a state-created institution or is this a natural reality? And how you answer that question will determine how you view the whole question of the redefinition of marriage.
Absolutely. I think that's totally the case because, just even for myself growing up, trying to think about what marriage is and how I think about it, et cetera, obviously people from different backgrounds have different views on marriage. So you're right. Defining exactly what that is really what leads this debate in one way or another. But I think we've really let this situation get into, heterosexual people have let this, by their disrespect of marriage over the past 50 years, have really allowed this type of scenario to come to fruition.
That's
right?
A good point.
Because if we respect marriage and we don't get divorced and remarried and treat marriage as it should be, then it doesn't open the gates for other types of redefinitions and scenarios like this to occur.
That's absolutely true.
New death with dignity legislation inspired by the late Brittany Maynard has been introduced in Albany, New York. So this whole death with dignity movement has really picked up a lot of steam recently.
Absolutely.
And it really kind of surrounds or has been led by this Brittany Maynard incident. And so Brittany Maynard, just to give a little bit of background, was someone who was living, I think she was living in California, she was living outside of Oregon, and she decided to move to Oregon because there was a law that said that she could basically get prescription from her physician and that she could end her own life. And so the state that she lived in didn't have that. And so apparently it caused a bunch of problems for her because she wanted to die because she had terminal brain cancer.
Right.
And so she felt that she had no reason to live. She tried to do as much fun stuff as she could before she died and get as many goals out of the way as she could. And then she decided that she would take her own life. And it was very public. And there's a lot of controversy around it, and people tried to convince her not to take her life. There's a lot of talk about it. And so now that she has taken her life, there's been a big push, especially by her husband, Mr. Diaz, and this is just the latest case where these death with dignity laws are trying to be pushed.
Right, yeah, and we see, there was an effort in Colorado that was defeated actually narrowly, and there's a push in California. So we're seeing multiple, this is just one of those attempts, but it's very concerning. The thing that I found most alarming in this, the state senator Diane Savino said that killing yourself, if you're suffering, killing yourself should be a basic human right.
Right.
That's radical language.
I think it is radical.
Totally outside of anything that our government or that our society has ever recognized, that you have a basic human right to kill yourself.
Right.
And our whole, the structure of our society and our laws is based upon the idea that we don't kill people.
Yes.
And that and that's such a foundational rule for society.
Yeah.
And it opens up to all kind of abuses. But just you look at the radical shift in language. Nobody had been claiming that before. And what we have is this normalization. You have this attractive young woman who sort of becomes a poster child for wanting to kill herself. And I think that's really what's been paving the way for this legislation to be pushed in these other states.
Anytime you want to get something done nowadays, it seems like you just have to slap that it's a right on the front of it, right? And so it really strikes a chord with people, or strikes a nerve, I guess, with American people. And it's like, oh yeah, I mean, if it's a right, we can't mess with this. And so because of past history and things like that of the United States, I think it becomes this, well, we don't want to make a mistake again. And so a lot of, it seems like moral issues like this are riding on the coattails of that kind of sentiment. To your point earlier, some of the supporters of these types of laws will say that, well, there's checks and balances in place to make sure that bad things don't happen. Like, for instance, 2 witnesses have to attest that the request is voluntary, like this law in Albany, New York, that's what it's saying. And that 2 physicians have to confirm the prognosis is terminal. And it's a felony. There's apparently felony penalties if there's coercion or forging involved and things like this. So people will say, well, it's, safe from all of these types of things that you're worrying about. But I really think that it's just the opposite of what a physician should be doing, right? The Hippocratic Oath turns into a hypocritic oath, really, right? You're supposed to take care of people and help them get better.
Right.
And then there's just so many different things, like just talking points about this that are twisted out of context and looked at in the wrong light, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. Just the it's motivated by compassion, and
yes.
I think we have to recognize that that's an important motivation. That we don't want to suffer. There's something in us that says that's scary. I don't want to be in this situation where I'm not really in control of myself and where I'm suffering. But there are better ways to cope with it. We have options like hospice and palliative care and things that really respect our human dignity. And the places where this has been implemented have seen abuse.
Yes.
In Oregon, there have been cases where people were denied chemotherapy and instead they were offered lethal prescriptions because it was cheaper for the insurance company. We've had cases of the drugs ending up in the wrong hands, of people being pressured. There's absolutely abuses here. And then it also, what is it saying to society? It's telling society, this is how you deal with suffering. You kill yourself. So what about the teenager who's being bullied? What about someone who's just broken up with their boyfriend or girlfriend? This is how we deal with suffering. We kill ourselves.
Absolutely.
There's also this really interesting fact that studies have found that patients who request physician-assisted suicide, once they're treated for depression, they usually withdraw that request.
Wow.
So these people are depressed. They're not necessarily giving up on life, but we're killing depressed people. We don't kill depressed people, we help them.
Right.
So this is a horrible precedent. It's a very dangerous bill, and it's something that we as a society really need to come to terms with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the big thing too, because a lot of the proponents, supporters of these bills will say, well, we should end suffering. We live in a society where it's just like suffering is this bad thing, right? But we as Christians know that we can use that suffering for good. We can unite it to Christ, offer it up for other people. The suffering, Christ gave meaning to suffering, right?
It has redemptive value.
It has redemptive value. We have to remember that. And a lot of people also say, well, you shouldn't force your beliefs on me, etc. But really, that's what laws are, forcing a belief, a common belief, onto people, right? We say you shouldn't steal things, that's bad. And so I think it is important for society that we do say, listen, this in general is a bad thing and we shouldn't do it. So,
absolutely.
All right.
Coming up after the break, some startling claims about a birth control that is approved by the FDA.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman. In our next story, the long-term birth control Essure is advertised as a safe and effective means of family planning, but thousands of women are now coming forward complaining of medical complications.
Wow.
So what is Essure? Essure is, you basically take these metal coils and insert them into a woman's fallopian tubes, which are where the egg would normally be released. And it causes this chronic inflammation, and over time the tissue grows into the coils and blocks the fallopian tube, so the egg can't be released and the woman can't get pregnant. So quite an interesting concept, some really alarming things coming out about this device. I actually had the opportunity to talk with Dr. Steve Hickner. He's the medical director at Bella Natural Women's Care in Denver. Let's take a look at what he said. Dr. Hickner, I know you're very busy. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for taking some time to be here and comment for us.
Oh, it's good to be here, Michelle. Thank you for inviting me.
So I'm going to read just a couple of the consumer complaints that have come out of Essure. There have been thousands of women who have complained about problems that they say were caused by Essure. These are a few of them. Perforated organs, metal coils becoming lodged in the colon, fetal disfigurement due to nickel poisoning, chronic debilitating pain, exhaustion, bouts of depression, and suicidal thoughts. What is your response to that?
Well, Michelle, that's disturbing. If I had a patient come into my office who is inquiring whether she should have Essure, I would feel a moral obligation to share that information with her. I would not want to encourage a woman to undergo a procedure where she could have those kinds of complications.
Absolutely. And another aspect of this that was brought up was that the FDA has given this pre-market approval, and what that means is that women cannot collect damages from the manufacturer if there's a problem with that. So some people, and normally that pre-market approval is reserved for life-saving or preserving devices, very important medical devices. So some people are saying that it's a bit odd that this is being given to a voluntary, something that's not required, a device like this. Do you think that this is promoting women's health and safety to give this pre-market approval to this device?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Michelle. I think it's curious that the FDA would approve such a device, given the experience that the American public has had so far. The other thing about the FDA is that all of the devices that have been taken off the market, or all of the medications that have been taken off the market, were at one point approved by the FDA. Frankly, that gives me reason for concern about any activity that the FDA conducts in regard to safety and quality. So I would look at the FDA recommendations or approval very carefully before I would personally recommend this to a patient.
That's a very good point. One of the other complaints that was brought up about this was that the medical clinical trials that the FDA used to approve it were brought by the manufacturer. So it was the manufacturer saying, hey, look, this device is really safe, and the FDA was saying, okay. So I think, sometimes you have to question that.
Well, Michelle, I mean, I've been in practice now for 23 years, and I know very well how the pharmaceutical and medical device industry works. Young, attractive men and women in sales attire, taking physicians to elaborate seminars at posh hotels, learning this approach perhaps on a weekend, and returning to their community and implementing it with tremendous incentives, financial incentives. So I think the quality of care, the patient's own interest sometimes is not kept in the focus by a physician trying to be successful.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it.
Yeah.
Now, if a woman came to you and said that she wanted this device, that she wanted this long-term birth control Essure, what would you say to her?
Yeah, Michelle, at Bella, we're all about encouraging women to tap into their feminine genius, about empowering themselves and each other, about gaining control of their bodies and understanding their bodies. And Essure doesn't really promote that philosophy on women's health. So I would recommend to her to learn, if she's really interested in Essure, if she's interested in family planning, I would rather sit down and talk with her about how her body works, how her physiology goes through the menstrual cycle, and how she can take true control of her fertility.
You work at Bella Natural Women's Care. That's a new women's health care practice in the Denver area. Can you tell us a little bit more about the philosophy there and how it's different from what you'll find in mainstream women's health care?
Yeah, Michelle, the founders of Bella Natural Women's Care are actually two women, a mother and daughter, Dee Dee Chisholm and Abby Sinnott, both of whom are nurse practitioners and have extensive experience in women's health. And they had it on their vision to develop a women's health practice where they could indeed, as I mentioned before, encourage women to tap into their feminine genius and empower themselves and each other and promote an authentic health for women. So that's what we do at Bella. So when the woman comes into the office, we start from that standpoint and carry out that philosophy and practice. And in regard to family planning, which is what Essure is trying to promote, we teach them about how their fertility cycle works, and we teach them ways in which they can manage their fertility in a very, actually, frankly, scientific way that's based on evidence-based medicine.
And you've spent a significant amount of time in your own life practicing this type of medicine that is adhering to the Catholic Church's teaching, but is also promoting women's health. What made you interested in that? What makes you think that this is the superior way to do things?
I finished residency and training from OBGYN in 1991, Michelle, and about within a year of going into practice in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I was basically challenged by the women who are coming into our practice to learn a different way of doing women's health, learn a different way of doing family planning. I read Humana Vitae. I was personally convicted. And from there, I just quit prescribing birth control.
Wow.
That is to say, contraception. I didn't do sterilizations and I didn't do abortions. And I've learned all the methods of natural family planning that are available to women. So we teach and we promote all of that. And that's what I've made it my career's most important activity, actually.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for all the work that you do, and thank you for being here on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here, Michelle. Thank you very much.
It's a great discussion you guys had. I think it was very appropriate to have a woman's natural care center here to have that discussion with, because when I first heard about Essure, I have a friend actually that told me about it. I want to say it was like maybe a year or two ago, maybe it was last summer, but before anything in the news had come out about it and everything. And I think a lot of people, women who did not want to become pregnant again, were very excited about it. But the first thing that I could think of, especially in a society where we are so focused on eating milk, drinking milk that doesn't have hormones in it, and foods and all these healthy natural things, that jamming a coil inside of your fallopian tube and then letting scar tissue come around it just so you don't get pregnant. I don't know, it sounded pretty like invasive and contrary to how a lot of women feel about that they should be healthy and natural and things like that. And so I think it's really important, and I was glad that you were able to have that conversation with someone from that background and that perspective, and I think that reflects how a lot of women feel nowadays.
Yeah, some really alarming comments, and hopefully this is coming to light more, because women are getting hurt.
Yep, absolutely. All right, stay tuned. We have one more story coming up.
Welcome back to Heroic Media. In our final story, a woman in Maryland defied the odds when she became pregnant through in vitro fertilization at age 56. But just days after delivering twin boys, she collapsed and died of a bowel obstruction.
Wow, that's really sad.
It is sad.
I mean, this woman wanted to have children her whole life. And so I can totally empathize with those types of people.
Absolutely.
Right? And I mean, it took like my wife and I 5 years, the first 5 years of our marriage, we did not get pregnant, and we were like, what's going on? So I can understand where people have a desire, and she had a desire for a very long time, apparently, and so the story goes. And I mean, geez, she tried in vitro fertilization, all kinds of procedures. She went through a lot of, her husband said, she just had this need to have children, and she would go into these treatments, and they were grueling. She'd have to take shots and hormones. Of course, if it failed, then she would be depressed for a while. Then she would buck up and try again. So it's like, man, it seemed like it was just like this long road where she really wanted to have children, and the desire for children is good. And then she got pregnant. She was really excited. She didn't tell anybody about it for a little while because she didn't want to jinx it. And then she gave birth to twins, and died shortly after because of a bowel obstruction. So yeah, lots of things to think about. My first thought was, wow, this is pretty. It's obviously sad when somebody's waited so long and then they finally have children, and then especially at such an old age, when you typically don't have children, and then she passed away from the complications.
Yeah, as you mentioned, this woman, she had wanted to have kids pretty much her entire adult life. And she's an impressive woman, a really incredible story. She had been an educator, then she became a top-notch lawyer, and then said, oh, I think I'll become a doctor now. And then became a high-ranking Red Cross executive that was working to help coordinate treatment of Ebola patients. So we're talking about a very, very intelligent and successful woman, but she wasn't waiting to have kids because of her career. She wasn't putting off children. That whole time she was trying to have kids and never could. So it's really, really sad, and you can just feel her pain, but she wasn't able to have them. And I think what's really sad about this is that society and the medical community were telling her that IVF was the way to go about this, and that for whatever reason her body was not able to have kids, and that at age 56, they allowed her to have a donor embryo placed in her body. That's a risky procedure. There's actually a lot that we don't know about that, because normally women can't have children after a certain age. Usually by 56, you've hit that age.
Right.
And so it's very risky. You know, it's unnatural. Our bodies are not able to cope with that often, and it's not how they were designed. And it's actually interesting. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine, their ethics committee actually said that embryo transfer for women over age 55 should be discouraged, even if the woman is healthy, simply because we lack the data on the risks for women having a pregnancy at that age. And so, you know, with IVF, we've opened up this brave new world where a woman of any age can become pregnant.
Right. All you have to have is a healthy uterus. That's what surprised me, was that this clinic was saying that if you have a healthy uterus, you can have an IVF procedure done at any age, is what they said. Any age. I was like, whoa, that's pretty crazy. I didn't think that it would even be possible. But yeah, that was one of the things that stood out to me as well. And like you said, it's so unknown. And they did say that they thought that risks could include things like hypertension, diabetes, and a need for a cesarean section, or some issues that could arise from having this procedure done if you're in your 50s. So.
And the Catholic Church is opposed to IVF for a number of reasons. That it removes the creation of children from the sexual union. It tries to play God, all these different things. But also, is this good for women? That this woman was told, here, do this, this is going to be good for you. And that's not true. And so really, you know, the Catholic Church really tries to promote the good of the human person and just respect for the nature of sexuality and the human person and the human body. So I think it's heartbreaking that this woman was told this, and the, you know, you see her devastation at not being able to have children, but it's really sad that she was told that this was the way to go about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming from a Catholic perspective, when I was reading this, I couldn't help but hear all the times and time again where she tried these procedures over and over. And I just was thinking about the poor children that lost their lives due to, you know, her wanting to have children. And so it's kind of ironic in that situation. But, you know, all we can do is share the truth about IVF, and then, you know, hope for the best. So that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode.
That's it for this week. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.